So welcome everyone to the latest Trees Around the Globe Student Research Campaign webinar. My name is Brian Campbell. I'm the lead for the campaign, and we have Peter Nelson and Peter Falcon. And today we have a special guest speaker, Dr. Jonas Jaegermeyr, and he will be highlighting and looking at global crop growth, agriculture projections, and land cover data. And he will be highlighting a few areas within the globe, Near East and North Africa region where we are right now. So with that said, I'm going to move on to the next slide and a little bit about the agenda for today. We will have a warm-up activity and I will do some metrics as well. And then we have two poll questions, okay? And then these two poll questions will lead us into something that Peter Nelson will introduce to us called PNAS. It's the number of tree species on Earth. It's a really cool research article with some cool graphics that you'll really be able to check out and really see the connection here. And then we will play the first part of the interview with the Globe Near East and North Africa Regional Coordination Office's Salma Al-Zubi. She is from Amman, Jordan, and Peter Falcon did an interview with her for the campaign since we are starting the Globe Near East and North Africa region this month. And then we will have our feature presentation from Dr. Jonas Jaegermeyr. He's a research scientist at Columbia University Climate School, the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies in New York City. And then Peter Nelson will be highlighting the land cover and globe countries in the Near East and North Africa region and focusing a little bit on land cover and land use for these regions, as well as looking in on the cornfields with JEDI. It's basically showing you a combination of prediction versus what JEDI sees, and you'll be able to see just how amazing the instrument is on JEDI. And then we will have a quick reminder about the upcoming, very upcoming, 3 days away, 2022 Spring Tree Height and Land Cover Intensive Observation Period. And then when we have some final discussions and some final Q&A. All right, so let's start off with the regional warm-up activity. So looking at these two pictures, okay, as we've done before, I want you to put in the chat which one of these you think most represents the globe Near East and North Africa region the best. Maybe one does. Actually, maybe you think both of them do or none do. But if you take a look at these, you know, let me know, let us know in the chat which you think is the most representative of the globe Near East and North Africa region. And I'll give you a couple minutes to do that. Write that in the chat. And then Peter, if you could then, you know, read out anything that's in the chat, that would be great. So go ahead and take a couple minutes to take a look at these pictures and write in the chat what you think.
Well, that didn't take long. Lauren already made a suggestion. She says the pistachia is one, and Valerie agrees. Jonas says the right one is Joshua tree that I know from California. So pistachia is my guess.
All right, excellent.
Anna agrees. Pistachia. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Pistachia Atlantica.
And then once we have some more in the chat, then I have a couple slides here, you know, with a little information about each one of these trees. Well, I say trees kind of in quotation marks.
Zarinka from Croatia has agreed. She thinks the pistachia Atlantica is her choice.
Great. We have a brilliant group of folks here today.
And from always parts all over the world. That's always awesome to see.
I can't see Peter, but has Peter Nelson joined us?
He has, yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Larissa mentioned that the pistachia, and Anna says both are dry environments with little vegetation cover.
Ah, that's a great observation. Yeah. All right. All right, so let's go ahead and move on. So the first one, the Pistachia atlantica, also known as the Sahabi tree, and it's called the blessed tree. I will not try to pronounce that, the tree of Al. Okay, so it's a 1,400-year-old tree located in Safawi, Jordan. It's located about 156 kilometers from Amman, the capital of Jordan, where our interviewee is from, Salma Al-Zubi. The tree is a pistachio tree, and it's located on an old trade route between Mecca and Damascus. Caravans used to travel by this route. So this is a, pretty famous tree, pretty famous, very old tree. So yes, this one is the one that most represents the region. Now, some of you also said that, yes, this is a Joshua tree, the Yucca brevifolia, and it's actually a plant species. It's not really identified as a tree. So it's basically a yucca. And it is a tree-like, it's tree-like in habit, which is reflected in its common names, like the Joshua tree as mentioned, the yucca palm, tree yucca, and palm tree yucca. It is native to the arid southwestern United States, primarily California, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, and also northwestern Mexico. That's a big misconception. People see this, they hear Joshua tree, and they automatically think it's a tree. But upon a bunch of research that I did, it's not actually a tree. It's just a form of vegetation. It's not officially a tree, but looks like a tree. But yeah, that's great that I think it was Anna who said, we really, both of these trees here really, thrive in environments that are basically hot and arid and dry. So you can see, totally different in style, but in form, but they do seem to appear in the same, type of environment. All right, let's move on. Core campaign team, you should all know us by now. And as a reminder that this is being recorded, and since a lot of people like to watch the recording after because they can't be there live because a lot of students are still in school with their teachers and they can't make it as well. So just wanted to, we get lots and lots of views after the fact when the recording is up and available. So here we have some numbers. I'll direct it to the bottom as usual. For the full campaign, we have just over 49,000 tree height measurements from over 19,300 global sites since the beginning of the campaign on September 15, 2018. We have 26,000 land cover measurements from over 17,300 global sites and just over 29,000 greenings measurements from 772 global sites. So that's a lot of data. That's what we're really trying to build on. And we want to really jump this up during the intensive observation period that begins in 3 days. But as a campaign as a whole, we have 56 blogs up from the campaign. We have participants currently who are active from 58 countries. And this is the, this is the 44th webinar of the campaign, the official webinar of the campaign. And we've had a couple other special ones as well, ones that aren't the typical monthly webinars. But in this map you see is where all the tree height, land cover, and greenings are coming from for the life of the campaign. And we'd love to fill in some of these spots, but we understand that there's some locations here that most likely won't because there's really not much citizen science going on right there, or some ground-based observations. As a reminder, we also have the ISAT-2 orbit track that's available for Android and iOS, and the Android one now, it's been out for a little while, but you can also see on here where ISAT-2 was and where it will be, so you can go out and take observations when ISAT-2 is nearby or overhead. And we have the iOS version, which is basically, it's a predictor to show you where ISAT-2 will be. It doesn't have the capability yet to look in the past. They're working on that, but there's a couple links down here at the bottom where you can check this out, and I'll have that on the webinar page with the recording, so you have those as well. But this is really cool because you can then, if you see it in your area, it's going over an area with trees, and you're able to take tree height measurements, either using a handheld clinometer or the NASA Globeserver Trees tool. You can go out and then, and if ISAT-2 hits it, you can do a comparison that we've talked about many times for the last couple of years, your comparison between your data and the ISAT-2 tree canopy height data. So we have these land cover maps. I'm just showing you this here because we're going to hop into this in a couple minutes. But now we have this poll question, all right? And once again, I have these 2 poll questions here, and I'm going to ask you to do it in the chat. So we have 6 globe regions, okay? Africa, Asian Pacific, Europe and Eurasia, Latin America and Caribbean, Near East and North Africa, and North America. What globe region has the greatest number of tree species? What do you think? Now, this one and the next poll question, they'll be back to back. And the deal is that after the second question, after the answers come in, I will then pass it over to Peter Nelson so he can bring up the research article from PNAS that is really amazing, has a really amazing graphic on it that I know Peter wants to show. And that ties into what these questions are asking. So once again, poll question 1, and we'll take about 30 seconds to do that, and I'll go to the second one. What globe region has the greatest number of tree species? Africa, Asian Pacific, Europe and Eurasia, Latin America and Caribbean, Near East and North Africa, or North America? And Peter, what are most people saying in the chat?
Well, so far we got Latin America, Caribbean, and we have another answer. Lauren mentioned Europe and Eurasia.
All right. All right, let's just move to the second question here. What globe region has the greatest area of trees? Remember, this one was number of tree species. This is greatest area of trees. So the area where that is encompassing has the most, the most trees, not species, but most trees overall, the greatest area of trees. Once again, Africa, Asian Pacific, Europe and Eurasia, Latin America and Caribbean, Near East and North Africa, and North America.
Okay, as Anna mentioned, Latin America and Africa. And as we wait for that, I just want to point out, Brian, that we actually got a request for the links that you just posted in your previous slide. If we can put those in the chat box.
Sure.
Thank you. Lauren mentions Africa. Mike Jabot, Latin America. Jonas, his answer is Eurasia.
All right, so I'm going to stop sharing. And Peter Nelson, are you ready to share that article with the awesome graphic on it?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I am, Brian.
All right, let me do that. And then after you're done with the PNAS, the graphic, you can pass it back to me, and then we're going to show the interview, and then we'll have the featured speaker. And then after the speaker, Peter will then talk about, I'll bring you back on, Peter, to talk about the, some of the land cover things that you want to talk about for this region. Sound good?
Perfect.
All right, let me stop sharing here. All you.
All right, that changed my screen layout. Gotta love this. All right. Thanks everyone for bearing with me on that one. So I wanted to highlight, in the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences journal that came out, there was this paper, January 31st, 2022, so a very recent one, that gives us all some nice foundation to be able to answer these questions. And what I really want to highlight is that this paper highlighted over 73,000 tree species. So those are individual types, and that is actually 14% higher than what previously had been estimated. And so I want to recommend this as a really useful paper to introduce to your students and have them look at how we come up with these numbers and maybe even how their contributions can contribute to tracking these numbers over time. The number of species, really, really interesting. And what really caught my attention was this nice graphic that gives us the answers to that question that Brian was actually asking about. And so, based on that, we actually see the number of individual trees that have been counted or estimated in these different areas. And we see in North America, there's over 24 million individual trees. That's a lot of trees to try to count individually. So, can we get students to be able to do that? That's a really hard question. Eurasia has an estimation of over 6 million trees. South America has an estimation of 1 million trees, over 1 million trees. Africa, only 157,000 trees. And then we can see that Oceania, Australia, New Zealand area has about 306,000 trees. And one thing that we know that I think is really important that was highlighted is how these maps that we look at are stretching our idea of how much area is in these locations. And so one thing that we do know is that across these high latitude areas, there are a lot of trees, but the way our maps are kind of stretch things and makes it really hard to interpret at times. So it might be confusing to your students to look at these different areas and try to understand the amount of area because of the way our maps stretch. But I find this to be really interesting that even though North America has the most number of trees, the number of species is really low. Only 1,800 different species in it, compared to South America, which has over 16,000 different individual species. So the diversity that we have in South America is really great, even though the number of trees individually is a lot lower. And we have the exact opposite happening in North America, where we have a low number of species, low diversity, but we have a greater number of individual trees that are out there. And that might reflect something about our land management or our history in these locations. So I wanted to really highlight this as a great graphic, because what I really appreciate about this is you can start to see the shapes of these trees, the colors of the trees that exist around the world. And I think this, it really puts the images of what we're trying to measure and what we're trying to do in this Trees Around the Globe student research campaign in a way that I've never seen before. And so I wanted to really highlight this as a resource that we can all use to help us put our individual measurements into context. And hopefully this will lead into a little bit of some questions about why we do not seem to have much trees in particular locations, or much tree cover in particular locations. And I think that's what we'll hear a little bit about today in our presentations. And so with that, I will put this link into the chat so everybody has access to it. And I encourage you to use it in your communication, in your own research, to put your context into this global archive. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Peter. All right, excellent. So let me jump back to the PowerPoint so we can show the first part of the interview with Salma Al-Zubi and Peter. And you will notice, Peter, do you want to mention anything about like the bandwidth and everything with the interview?
Sure. So when we did this, unfortunately, Selma had very low bandwidth, so she had to turn her camera off, which was unfortunate. So all you get to see is me. But you still get to hear her. She has some very great answers to some of the questions that we asked, and she is very well prepared.
Right. Does that look good on your end, Peter?
Yes, it does. It's
All right,
not
excellent.
presentation mode, but you can still see it.
Oh. Yeah. Do this again here.
Oh my God, am I wearing the same shirt? I think I am.
All right, let me do this again here.
It's my work from home attire.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and play this right now. Here we go.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Trees Around the Globe Student Research Campaign webinar. Thank you for joining us once again. And as you know, when we do our webinars, we like to conduct some interviews with some interesting people, some fascinating people, part of the GLOW program. We usually try to include teachers, educators, partners, scientists. And today we have a special guest. This is my notes here. Salma Al-Zubi. She's a Nini Regional Country Coordinator in the Near East, North Africa. And unfortunately, the internet is a bit bad today, so we're going to have her camera turned off. But I'd just like to say thank you, Salma, for joining us today. And thank you for conducting the interview with me today.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to meet you. And I will introduce myself, Salma Al-Zabi, Global Program Regional Coordinator for Near East and North Africa Office.
Thank you. And what does it, your position, what does it entail? What do you usually do as part of the regional country coordinator's job?
I facilitate all the program, global program in the region, and Mediterranean between the GIO and country coordinator in each country. And we already do the beautiful job for the global program, and because this is the beautiful program, so all the time we contact the country coordinator and the GIO for the every update about the global program, and we have the monthly we have meeting to the country coordinator to know what's updates, what's going on, what's happened earlier, and what about the data entry, what about the schools, increase the schools, and we encourage that, to be part of IVSS for the students, encourage the students and the teachers, also the country coordinator, to be part of training to capacity building for all of them. This is a little bit of our what we're doing as a summary. So, and all the time we have to be have a new ideas or creative project or something like this to people to increase our program, to develop this. And this is short or little bit of the what we are doing this.
Sounds like a lot of work. And you've been with the program for how many years now?
I started with the program since 2012.
Wow, that's 10 years. That is a lot of time. So in that time, I imagine you must have a lot of memories, some great experience. So can you tell us, and I know it's going to be difficult, but can you tell us just one of your most memorable moments, your favorite moments working in the GLOBE program?
You know, when the first annual meeting, it was GLE in India. This time when I see a lot of teachers, a lot of students together, work together in the same project to protect the air, to do something better for the environment. It's similar, it's education, because I was a teacher. And this is amazing. This is the beautiful memory when I see that at first. I love it. This is the big.
I can agree with you more. It's for me, I think my favorite moment is seeing two students from completely different parts of the world coming together for a GLOBE meeting because of science and the GLOBE program. And then they become friends. And once the conference is over, they remain friends using social media. And it's great to see that science and the GLOBE program and people like you and myself, basically help to bring these two worlds together, because these students would probably have never had met before if it was not for the GLOBE program. So that's always something special and dear to me that I think of when I think of my work with the GLOBE program.
Great.
So let's go ahead and get started with some of these questions. I promise they're not going to be, it's not going to be pulling teeth. It's not going to be hard. So the first question is, why is it important for GLOBE participants in GLOBE Near East and North Africa to be a part of the Trees Around the Globe student research campaign?
Yes, it's very important. First, the distribution of land cover in the Near East and North Africa due to geographic and weather condition varies from country to country, where there are forests and in Lebanon, Pakistan, Jordan, Tunisia, Morocco, and little bit in North Saudi Arabia. And the other part of the area is considered desert, the desert will grow. Second, the scientific approach of the project help the student in building capacity for scientific study and matching them in parties, so that joining the regional student trees around the globe campaign contributes greatly to knowledge of land cover conditions. When the student taking measurement and transferring data to determine the environment reality on the globe, this is a special matter that is applied scientifically and practically. The campaign helps share experience and knowledge among a globe student around the world.
Thank you. That was. Continue. I apologize. I know there's a bit of lag, so I apologize. Continue.
No, it's okay. That's what I think in my mind and around of our region.
Well said. I think there's, excuse me, something like 13 different countries in your region alone. A lot of different biodiversities there, I would imagine as well. So, is it safe to say that you would recommend both students and teachers in the Near East, North Africa region to work both with globe data in land cover and trees, and also possible using satellite data?
Sorry, please.
I'll repeat the question.
Yeah.
Do you recommend students and teachers in globe Near East, North Africa to work with both globe data for a land cover, tree height, and satellite data if possible?
Yes, of course. We try to mention many when we have a training for the teachers or country coordinator or trainer or military trainer, all the time we have the part of the protocol for the cover land, for the trees, or for the all the cover land all the time. We do it by last time in Kuwait 2 weeks ago. We have a workshop in Kuwait for the land cover. But you know, the Kuwait is not a lot of trees there or forester or something like that, but they have a grace. So they do that. We appreciate what Mr. Ibrahim Sayah he's doing, and he sent us pictures for this. We appreciate what they doing, what he's doing for this. Specific, and in Saudi Arabia we have also many teachers. They work in the land cover protocols or campaign trees around the globe campaign in Saudi Arabia, and also in Bahrain. Both of them, they have a good experience in this protocols or this campaign specifically.
Thank you.
All right, so that first part of the interview was great, Peter. Thank you. Really talked a little bit about why it's important in their region, in the globe Near East and North Africa region, to really focus on tree height and land cover, because as most parts of the planet, it's changing dramatically. So with that said, we will now turn it over to Dr. Jonas Jaegermeyr. And once again, he's a research scientist at Columbia University Climate School at NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies in New York City. And he will be talking about global crop modeling and climate-related implications for future food productivity, with a few highlights from the globe Near East and North Africa region. So let me go ahead and stop sharing and pass it over to Jonas. Welcome.
Wonderful. Thanks, Brian.
Sure.
And thank you all for having me. Let me go ahead and share my screen real quick. Quick thumbs up if you can see this.
Yeah, we see email.
Oh, that's not good. Let's hide my email for a second. see I'm browsing your PNAS paper that I have a bunch of questions on, but I want to show you my PowerPoint. So let's see how I can bring the let me stop share. Okay, can you see my slides?
Yeah,
Probably
we
not.
see it. We see the date.
Oh, okay, great, because I have
Yeah.
this accessibility thing here going on. Okay, sorry for that. Cool. Hi, everybody. Let me go back to the start. Yeah, I'm Jonas Jaegermeyr. I'm a climate scientist and crop modeler at Columbia University and NASA GISS in New York City. And so to be honest, I don't really know much about the background of our audience. So I'm trying to keep this as broad as possible, but it's also state-of-the-art science. So we go into some detail, and bear with me if that's too detailed, and we can address questions then. But I would like to share latest insights on how climate change might affect global food security, global agricultural productivity, and then zoom into 2 hotspot regions where we carried out some projects in Morocco and Uzbekistan. This is funky. Okay, so this video this is just, you know, to give you all like a flavor of where we're going with this. This is a neat graphic that the NASA news team put together based on a recent publication we had, showing ensemble results. So multi-model studies, projections of how crop productivity could look like under unabated climate change towards the end of the century for 2 crops, for maize and for wheat. And we see very contrasting patterns that we can unfold a little bit and try to disentangle and understand where this comes from. Before we go there, I want to give you some background, what we do, where we are, who we are, what we do, and where we come from, because it's not a single person who can pull off this kind of research on a personal laptop. We formed AgMIP, which stands for the Agricultural Model Improvement and Intercomparison Project. And it now turns 10 years, and there's a huge consortium of people behind it. So we tend to say there's 1,000+ scientists grouped in that initiative that we call AgMIP, and we bring together the community from across various disciplines, all interested in agriculture and global change, but across scales and methodological approaches. So we're having economics teams across the whole spectrum, down to field scale experiments, to the farmers and stakeholders and so forth. So we're cross-discipline, cross-scale initiative to try to get to the bottom of the question: what does climate change do to global agriculture? And in that context, the leaf of this flower diagram lists AgGrid that I lead together with Christoph Müller at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research in Germany. And we are bringing together the global crop modeling teams that run their process-based models on supercomputers around the world. We group these teams and try to harmonize them and have them run the same inputs, parameters, assumptions, and so forth, to bring them on the same page, have them speak the same language to address uncertainty. And we learn more about that, but that's really important these days, to not just have a single model give you some estimates, but to draw from the richness of approaches and then calculate a mean or an average response and an error bar to really get a handle on how certain or confident we are in specific results. So these kind of like global simulations then lead into yet another MIP, So bear with me, it's ECMIP, the cross-sectoral model intercomparison project, which groups different sectors. So agriculture is one of them that I co-lead with Sam Rabin. And then there's water, biomes, energy, all these different sectors that are being impacted by climate change. And in a standardized, harmonized way, we can then evaluate the different results, which is pretty fantastic. You probably don't really know much about crop modeling, because in this seminar series, I figured you mostly talk about forests and trees, which is even more exciting to bring these results to you. So allow me to bring up the slide to just give a brief overview of what these crop models do, right? So that we all understand where we're coming from. So this mysterious construct of a crop model takes inputs. We put in temperature, precipitation, solar radiation, and CO2 concentrations that are being provided by either historical observations or by a climate model that then runs scenarios by the end of the century that we can put into the crop model, and we do the impact science. So we translate the climate change scenario into how it affects land surfaces and in particular global crop productivity. But there's more than climate, there's more than weather. There's farmers' management decisions, such as planting dates, what kind of crop variety they plant, how much fertilizer they put in the field, if it's irrigated or not, how we aggregate these kind of results, how do we assume where cropland actually is allocated. And you mentioned land use change in the introduction. I'm afraid that's not really part of where I'm going with this. That's not really my expertise, but we're closely collaborating with experts in the field that provide us with their state of the science maps and assumptions to let us know in this area of the states, we assume there's barley growing. So we use that in our aggregating tools to then tell the models, please simulate barley in that very grid cell, right? And then there's soils and other inputs. And we kind of have three kind of like targets where we go with this. One is our own science. So we run impact assessments and we can figure out more sustainable adaptation pathways. We can attribute things to climate change, which is a hot topic right now. But part of this is also to hand our results down chain. So we give our estimates to other groups that work with it. And one stakeholder is the agroeconomic groups that run trade and price models. And if we tell them climate change has X, Y, Z impact on corn yields, they would then translate that into their economic assessments. And then lastly, what becomes more and more important is not just looking 50 years out into the future, but really get a handle on what's happening now, what's happening by the end of the season, what's happening in 2, 3, 4 years. Can we put that into an early warning system that actually helps the farmers on the ground now to decide what am I going to plant, the insurances, how am I going to price my policies, and how can we develop international aid to distribute resources appropriately. So with all that, we have a little bit of a background, what we do with these kind of like global simulation rounds, right? So I mentioned AgMIP now turned 10 years. In 2014, the first landmark study led by Cynthia Rosenzweig here at NASA was the first multi-model study. So we put together all these crop models that we could get our hands on and did basically what CMIP does. So I don't know if you know CMIP, but that's the, also listed here in the title slide. That's the first kind of MIP that the climate models came together, formed the community, harmonized the models and say, okay, this is the central reference of what climate models do. So we tried to mimic that and do the same thing with the crop models. And that was the first ever approach to have harmonized multimodal crop models on this. And what we find out is that the impact models or the crop models in this case, introduce larger uncertainties than the climate models. So there's a whole lot of homework we need to do to reduce that and get a robust estimate on where we think agriculture's climate change is going to affect agriculture. So that was take-home message. Uncertainties are large, and yeah, plus minus the error bars are just huge. So, and then in the next couple of years, we focused on the historical context. We just used all of these models, fed them with all sorts of climate data and weather data we had to improve on them. We just tried to reproduce observational yields to just see where we stand, evaluate the models, improve the models, make them fit for purpose, to then apply them in outward-looking, forward-looking situations. Then we created a fancy emulator. We can talk about that maybe offline if you're interested, but we basically created a statistical surface, multi-parameter surface of perturbations of climate change. We shifted temperature systematically, temperature, precipitation systematically, all sorts of things. Huge effort, but now we have a lightweight statistical emulator that we can run within seconds and thousands of times, which is very handy in various applications. And now finally, this is where I want to go with you, is the recent ongoing activity. We use CMIP 6. Now you know what that means. In the latest iteration, so this is the latest climate change ensemble predictions that has been featured in the latest IPCC report. So we drive our crop models with the latest state-of-the-art climate modeling to create a reference archive of what global crop models think climate change does to global agriculture. This is neat. So let me see if I can pull this up real quick. So this is basically based on our emulators. So we have an interactive map online where you can go and explore impacts yourself. You can say, okay, what happens if temperature goes up by, say, 2 degrees or 3 degrees? Precipitation is going down by 20%. Oh yeah, climate change is associated with CO2 concentration changes. So let's put up higher CO2 concentrations, or maybe even select a different crop, right? So we can explore the impact simulated by the models in an interactive way online, which is pretty cool, and we can share the link if you wanted to. Well, okay, now to the, also, I don't know how long I'm supposed to speak. I think 20 to 25 minutes. So let's see. So this is the paper that came out in November, I think, and summarizes these results. And I want to maybe present the 3 main take-home messages with you, and then we can just discuss details later, but I think that's fine for today. So the first main finding is crop responses to climate change are more pronounced than expected. And pronounced, I use in the sense that the climate signal is stronger in both directions. So for some crops, the impacts are stronger. For some crops, the impacts are more pessimistic. And for some crops, actually more optimistic. So the effect of the climate signal is stronger. And here we see results for maize, global average response by the end of the century under 2 climate change scenarios. A high mitigation scenario, what we call RCP 2.6, with the SSB pathway. Let's skip that, but that's kind of like a best world outcome, the lowest climate change scenario we're currently running. And then a high emission scenario, RCP 8.5, assuming basically a business as usual approach. The big bold bar is the average response by the end of the century, -6% under high mitigation, -20% under a high emission pathway. Now, the interesting part is the skinny gray bars here represent the previous ensemble estimates that I mentioned in 2014, based on CMIP 5. the average response was plus 1%. And now within what, 7 years, models improved, the climate models improved, the crop models improved, the inputs improved, all of that. And now we land at minus 24%, a huge shift with dramatic implications for the global economy, for the poor, for global food systems, and so forth. So this is a dramatic shift in the response, not of just one model, but 12 state-of-the-art crop models that all speak in the same direction. So this is the first message. Climate response is more pronounced. Same story then for wheat, as I said, is more pronounced, but wheat estimates are actually higher than previously thought. And this is mostly associated with higher CO2 concentrations. For soybean and rice, it's also more pessimistic than previously thought, but you see that the average bar is around the 0 line with huge error bars associated. So for rice and bean, for soybean and rice, at least at global level, these results are difficult to interpret, and regionally we can talk about it, but globally these are not significant. Second main finding, the time of climate emergence occurs earlier than expected. And the concept of climate emergence is a nice way to look at the problem from a risk perspective. So how we define this is the time of climate emergence is the year in which the mean response, so the bold straight line, leaves the envelope of historical variability, right? So we have the historical fluctuations, and once we go past that range, we reach a new norm. And that's the emergence time, the time of climate impact emergence, that's important for local context, because say 5% change might be very different in a specific context where you have very high historical variability and the system is adapted to change, whereas in a very flat system, 5% change means a lot. So these results show that this point in time when the climate signal becomes important is actually around the corner. So for maize at global level, within the next 10 years under a high emission scenario, or out 30 years into the future under a high mitigation scenario. So this is pretty dramatic. And for wheat, we calculate the same metric, but for positive change, which is a message that we want to convey very carefully. But we should get used to the idea that climate change can also lead to positive change. So there are winners and losers. And in this case, for wheat at global level, we actually see these changes right now within the next couple of years. So climate change impacts are around the corner, which gives us very short lead times for adaptation. So we need to act now and transform global agriculture to be prepared for these kind of changes and not wait another 10 years until it's too late. I'm gonna skip this, but this is another neat way to visualize what the climate emergence means. So this map, colored in red, shows the arrival time, the year in which we do detect that kind of signal globally. And we see a lot of areas in dark red and straight red, which means that the climate impact emergence occurs, either now or within the next 10 to 20 years. And if we wanted to accumulate the areas where we find that signal, by the end of the century, 34% of global maize cultivated area is expected to see that kind of signal under a high emission scenario. 3/4 of global maize cropland will be affected significantly by climate change if we don't do enough to mitigate it. But even under a high mitigation scenario, we do see that many big breadbasket regions in the world are being affected, especially Central Central Asia and the MENA region. Well, here's another neat graphic, just visualizing how this emergence creeps up on global agriculture in various areas of maize cultivation globally. I think the NASA News team did a great job on visualizing these results in a dramatic way. This is a reference that people find the same signal, not just in agriculture, but in precipitation and temperature emergence. I spare this and we skip it in the interest of time. Going to the third main finding, and I'll stop there, which is that the impacts of climate change are disproportional across latitude, which is a reason for concern. So that's not a new finding, but it has huge implications. So climate change is expected to hit hardest in warmer regions, in lower latitudes, in the tropics and subtropics, which you can see here for maize as an example, as a latitudinal profile. This is from the south across the equator up north to the North Pole. In orange, we see negative change, and in blue, we see positive change. So you see largest changes at lower latitudes, which is intuitive because in a system that's already warm, additional warming will push crops to their physical limits. Whereas in higher latitudes where crops are currently grown under temperature limitation, think Canada and Russia, moderate warming can actually be beneficial and allow the crops to expand their growing season, plant different varieties, so forth. So climate change has most dramatic impacts in lower latitudes, and that's where farming systems often have a smaller capacity to adapt, and crops are used as in a smallholder environment as human food crops. So they translate directly into food security issues and reductions in livelihoods. So that's a reason for concern, and that's an actual term in IPCC language, that the disproportional geographical impacts of climate change are a reason for concern. So we see that same pattern for the different crops, highest impacts at lower latitudes, but the declines in lower latitudes are smaller for other crops. For soybean and rice, there is some compensating effects going on. So don't get hung up on soybean and rice for now. The point is that largest losses occur in the tropics and subtropics. Now you can ask the question, okay, the new results are so much more dramatic. Why is that, right? And to make, I don't want to walk you through these details. I'm happy to discuss more offline or in the Q&A. I just want to put out the main factors. The new climate scenarios are warmer, so that the climate models show a higher climate sensitivity and are warmer than previously thought, and that's harmful for crops in general. The second point is that the crop models have advanced, so the temperature sensitivity, the warming sensitivity in the crop models has also advanced and is higher. So there's more warming, and the crop models are more sensitive, which is a compounding effect. And then third, the CO2 sensitivity in the new climate scenarios is much higher, and that explains why wheat is seeing gains, because wheat is particularly sensitive to the so-called CO2 fertilization effect. A plant, not just crops, but in general plants, grow faster and bigger under higher ambient CO2 concentration, which is good for yields, but not necessarily for the nutritional content. So protein and micronutrient components of the yield don't scale with the higher yields and their higher CO2 concentration. So this might be a little bit misleading when we talk about yield gains, potential yield gains in the future. Okay, evaluation, why the new ensemble is better. I go through this real quick. it's difficult to say if a model is good for looking out into the future for 50 or so years, but we can look at variance and uncertainty in the ensemble, and we find that the new ensemble is more consistent than previous ensembles. So we're just, I'm just saying that the new ensembles seem to be better than older ensembles. So that just increases our confidence in using these new results. So I promise to not just look at the global level, but also present some zoom ins because we want to talk about MENA and North African countries and Middle East. So I just want to highlight real quick to a project that we've been working on in these regions. So the Aral Sea region, as you know, is one of the most dramatic examples of human influence with our system processes. So due to water abstraction from surface water for irrigation, the lake surface has shrunk dramatically. I don't know the numbers, you probably know better than I do, but this picture just exemplifies the dramatic ecological consequences of humans to that region. And the right picture symbolizes the deserted landscape that comes with widespread pollution due to dust wind transportation. So we were approached by UNDP to apply our modeling capacity in that context in Uzbekistan. So we ran some simulations under future climate scenarios, and for several crops, we're highlighting here maize, wheat, and rice, with the same pattern we see globally, and that's not surprising. So maize under a high emission scenario here on the right-hand top panel shows dramatic declines by around 50%. And wheat is more complex. It shows some regions of declines and then some other regions with big relative gains, which if you compare with the historical yield, are those that historically have very low gains. So the overall gain for wheat are still low, but it's a mixed bag. And rice also has negative trends under future climate change. But what's interesting in this context is not just the yield potential, but irrigation water requirements. So we can use the crop models to also simulate how much water do these crops require if it's warmer and precipitation patterns change, right? So this is new work that we need to interpret carefully, but I want to highlight one aspect why this is complicated. And in the bottom panel, in the bottom row, we see total irrigation water requirements over the growing season across time. And these consistently go down, even under an RCP 2.6 scenario that assumes a high mitigation scenario. And that is because the growing season shrinks. So if it's warmer, plants grow faster. Their phenological development is faster. So they reach maturity faster, they reach anthesis, flowering faster, which is one of the major reasons why yields decline. But if you have a shorter growing season, you also need less water to irrigate. So that's a reason why the total irrigation water requirements go down. But if we look at the daily requirements, which is more important because a farmer will eventually adapt and use different crops and different varieties that exploit the full growing season. So the daily requirements of water are going up on average, but then under a very high emission scenario, the CO2 fertilization kicks in and makes the plant more water efficient, which then affects irrigation water requirements. So this is a little complex. I just want to put out that we're working on stuff like that. But it's not a trivial question to say climate change means higher water requirements. It's a very complex picture to get to the bottom of. And then finally, in Morocco, we've been teaming up with USAID and other partner universities in the US, trying to develop a forecasting system and a seasonal outlook what the conditions may look like at the end of the season. And for doing so, we need more regional context, right? So these global simulations we do at 30 arc minutes or half degree, that on the right-hand panel, that's our default resolution for our global stuff. And you see the differences that a half degree resolution in Morocco doesn't give you a whole lot of detail, but then we rescale and use different inputs, different local assumptions on when to plant, what cultivars to plant, and so forth, and we create simulations with 3 arc minutes that shows more detail and is then useful for forecasting systems. And we're using NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center precipitation forecast in this case. The bottom panels show the historical forecast and then the difference for temperature and precipitation, and the top panel then our crop model forecasted yield results, which as long as the forecast is okay, the yield forecast is doing okay as well. So it all comes down to the actual climatological input we're using. But we have the infrastructure, we have the capacity to develop a product along these lines shown by these example studies. So I want to summarize here the main points and then hold on for a second and see where we stand in terms of time and questions. But I think what is clear from this presentation is that climate change affects crops in a more severe way than we've previously thought. And that's because the climate models are warmer, the crop models are more sensitive, and there's more CO2. The emergence is widespread and expected to come very soon. It's around the corner. And that's a new risk metric important for adaptation potentials. And then I highlighted the disproportionate impacts of climate change. Adverse impacts are largest in lower latitudes, which directly affects livelihoods and food security. And then finally, this archive we created of climate change projections is the largest process-based impact simulations archive as of today. And we can write all these papers ourselves. So we deliberately encourage inviting external teams to work with the data. So if you find yourself interested in this, I'm more than happy to collaborate and send you the data so you can play with it and write exciting scientific papers with it. With that, I would like to thank for your attention, and I'm very happy to take questions.
Thank you, Jonas. We do have some rather good questions for you, so we can stomp you. One from Anna. She asked, what variables are affecting crops the most, and changes in temperature or precipitation?
Yeah, great question. It really depends on where you are. So in the temperate environment, say Europe, for example, where precipitation isn't really a big issue usually, changes in temperature are the dominant driver. But in a subtropical environment where farmers really depend on the rainy season, if that's coming delayed on a different way, that will mess up the whole system. So there is no clear answer to say temperature or precipitation more important, but it really depends on where you are.
Thank you. She asked another question regarding the crops that you discussed. She asked, do they usually irrigate them? And is it a problem with the aquifers and fruit production expectation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So generally speaking, 80% of global cropland is rain-fed. Only 20% is under irrigation, and these 20% make up for about 40% of global caloric food production. So it is important, but for the foreseeable future, most of the cropland will remain rain-fed. So very vulnerable, sensitive to climate impacts. And these parts that are being irrigated, take their water either from surface water bodies, rivers, lakes, drainage, whatever, and part from aquifers. Now, to simulate abstractions, withdrawals from aquifers, that's complicated, and that's not really part of the models. So the models for now just assume if we think the crop is being irrigated, we just give the crop as much water as it needs, because that's a reasonable assumption when it comes to yield simulations. Operative farming systems usually don't operate under water constraints. So once you do irrigate, you have enough water, right? But it's not a great assumption when it comes to how much water are we actually using. So we can't infer from our results, at least from these. We have other setups where we can actually simulate these kind of things, but in this global multimodal approach, we can't speak to, if that's a sustainable water abstraction happening right here in that aquifer, or if we need to cut down on irrigation because it's not sustainable. I don't know.
Thank you.
That answers your question.
We'll find out in the chat if they ask more. One more question from Anna. She asks, in some regions, maize crops seem to be more affected than others. Why is this?
Well, generally, there's a dramatic discrepancy between wheat and maize, right? So wheat seems to do much better, especially in higher latitudes, for two reasons. Wheat is being grown at higher latitudes currently. So the productive bread baskets for wheat are situated, in northern US, Canada, Europe, northern Europe, and Russia, and so forth. So these areas are actually expected to benefit to some extent from moderate warming. And then, as I said, the CO2 fertilization kicks in. So wheat has a double benefit here. Maize in general is more high temperature resistant. So a maize and wheat crop put in the same place, the maize crop will do better under a warming experiment. But as it is distributed now, maize is being grown in lower latitudes where additional warming is actually harmful. So we do see little areas where maize can benefit. But if you look closely, for example, at the US sits right at the border of that gradient, where in the south, warming is harmful, and in the north might actually turn into opportunities. So, it really depends on the local context and local realities. We're doing this first order global picture here, but then if you wanted to look into developing adaptation potentials to really give advice to the farmers what to plant, or, deriving pathways forward from this, you need to refine and apply a more regional model with the, putting into local realities to get a better handle on this.
Thank you. Okay, a few more questions for you. One is, are there more climate change resilient species of maize that could be planted in the tropics or subtropic areas?
Yeah, short answer is yes. Long answer is it's difficult. So, whole institutes are busy developing new breeding lines, hybrid varieties that combine beneficial traits from different crop varieties to be more drought and temperature resistant, have higher yields, be more pest resistant, all these kind of things, which is an ongoing effort since Norman Borlaug, triggered the Green Revolution with his wheat breeding. So this is continuous effort, but we don't really know how much potential there is. We can't lean back and say, oh, plant breeding and genetically modified crops will save us, and therefore we're good. So that's not the way to do it. And it's really tricky to estimate what the potential is for developing better breeds in face of these dramatic climate change impacts we're seeing. So this is ongoing active research that we're currently doing in more classic ways, where we shift planting dates and use different cultivars that we already have, shift around irrigation and switch to different crops, kind of like get an estimate of what the system can do or could look like under climate change. And then on top is the question, yeah, where could breeding development and GMO take us? So that's slightly, that's an add-on that needs to be seen separately.
Thank you. Here's one that you may not get very often. This is has some policy implications. One of our colleagues, she asked, are there any policy implications based on the results of your research?
Yeah, of course. So we have a lot of stakeholders working with our results. One, maybe the most important stakeholder is the IPCC that featured our work in the most recent assessment report, highlighting that what these models do. But within AgMIP, we collaborate with regional teams and regional stakeholders, and even all the way down to farmers, and not only leveraging these global results, but really the expertise and the experience across scales out of AgMIP can then lead to devising adaptation pathways and help implementing these strategies. And that's the big challenge. It's easy to point to some data points and say, oh, this different crop variety seems the win-win pathway to do, but then go down to the field and actually change a running system in a sustainable and economically viable way to convince somebody to change their habits is a whole different story. So this whole climate change adaptation challenge is an implementation challenge after all. And that's where we need a lot of research, but also a lot of communication. So this whole effort is, it's after all, it's a communication and implementation challenge.
Thank you, Jonas. I do see your email is there, so she may reach out to you because I believe she has a follow-up question on perhaps you submitting an article or paper for a special science policy issue that she is on the editorial board for. So she may reach out to you for more information on that. Just two more questions for you. One of them is on natural disasters and the climate change model. The question is, let's see, it's a little difficult to read, but basically it is the natural disasters and climate change model. How does this, how do human political disasters impact these models? If that makes sense.
Sorry, I'm trying to see these. I can't really see where. Are you looking at the same the chat, or is there a second?
Yeah,
separate chat?
No, it's a chat box. The question is from Lauren, and the question is, how are the natural disasters that accompany climate change models? Unfortunately, human political disasters impact these models too. That question makes sense. If not, we can probably reward it.
Yeah. Somewhat makes sense. So disasters is not impact, right? So disasters is human impact times hazard, and we're working on that. There's the EW, what's it? Sorry, I'm blanking. The international disaster database that we draw the events from. So that's a common way to evaluate the models. Do we get the signal right? Can we pull recent heat waves and droughts and use observational data to see if the models can actually reproduce these? And we're not talking about the human impacts, right? This is just a measure to define these events. So there needs to be a certain number of casualties, a certain number of displaced people, certain number of economic impacts, and then they call it a disaster. but we can look at these as, a metric and say, okay, all these disasters had an associated impact on crop yield. Now let's use the models and try to reproduce that. And the answer is we're doing okay, but we're not, we still have some homework to do. So some of the models can reproduce the signals, some others are not sensitive enough. So, and if anything, there's a bias to underestimation. So that might be explained by the fact that the models aren't responsive enough to specific extreme events and temperature damage to the crops itself, and a long list of other things that we need to tackle. But the end of the day, end of the page conclusion is, if the models aren't sensitive enough, the results I showed in my presentation might actually be somewhat overestimating, or might turn out to be more pessimistic, especially for wheat. So these gains we're seeing might actually not really turn out if in view of the historical evaluations against disasters, if that makes sense. Sorry if I missed you can rephrase or send me an email. Happy to.
She actually did write another question. So we'll go to that one. Lauren mentions here in the desert, Southwest in the US, our Pueblo people knew how to farm sustainably. Is there any investigation or expanding traditional farming practices, planting companion? I'm getting lost. It's the last question if you read down at the end.
Yeah,
of
I have
the,
it here.
Chat box.
Plans to that lower water needs. Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, that's where we need to go back to, right? Not everything ancient and historical is great. There is a whole lot of improvements that are actually good, but diversifying a system and using co-benefits or exploiting co-benefits from sustainable intensification measures is really important. And sustainable intensification is the buzzword, but we don't really know how to do it, or we have ideas, but scaling that up is tricky. And some of the traditional farming practices are actually underrated. And if we look at the global potential summed up across different landscapes and communities and regions, are actually are associated with larger opportunities than we actually think. So one of them is a milpa method, right, where you combine maize and beans cultivation that have mutually beneficial effects. Beans would fix fertilizer in the ground and suppress weeds and alleviate soil evaporation and all these kind of things. Other metrics, other measures are, for example, water harvesting. So I worked a lot on that front to evaluate how much can we actually do if we used our water resources more efficiently. And then building a dam and conveying water across hundreds of kilometers is one thing, but simply collecting runoff water from your rooftop, stored in a barrel, and use that for supplemental irrigation during dry spells has a huge potential to bring the crop over specifically harmful periods. And in our simulations, can increase global food productivity by about 40% without using any additional water resources, by just using currently used water in a smarter and more efficient way. So yes, fully agreed. Being open to more diverse traditionally known farming systems can unlock huge potentials. Then again, the question is, how do we tell a farmer to do that, right? So that's a whole different question.
Yeah, and not so much of a question, but I just want to close with a comment from Mohammed in India. He says an example of, he says, floating agriculture in Bangladesh is a nice climate change adaptation. Your thoughts on that? The question is right above Lauren's.
Sorry, I just
Sure, no
I
problem.
was pulled over.
Floating agriculture.
In,
Yes, floating agriculture.
what is
in
floating
Bangladesh.
agriculture? So can you, I don't know if you want to unmute and come in for more of a discussion thing, but yeah, sorry, I don't know what floating agriculture is.
Mohammed,
Maybe
if you
somebody
want to
can
unmute and
specify.
comment. Yeah, if you want to unmute, he is unmuted. If you wanted to make a comment on that, Amit, please go right ahead. Mohammed. Well, he might be having internet problems.
Yeah,
He was kind of coming in and out.
you know,
Um,
you can send me an email or yeah, or just type in the chat.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jonas. Thank you very much. It was a great presentation. A lot of great visuals, by the way, especially the ones put together by the media team. That helped quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah.
So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Brian. Brian, I'm going to throw it back over to you.
All right. Thank you. We are going, because of time, Peter Nelson and I agreed that we're going to do the presentation on the corn and some JEDI information, the instrument on the International Space Station for our May webinar. And let me go to the final thing here that I want to highlight, because we only have a couple minutes left. And this is going to be the, let me go here. All right. So as you know, we have an upcoming trees around the globe. It's the upcoming 2022 Tree Height and Land Cover Intensive Observation Period. And it begins this Friday on Earth Day, so April 22nd, and it runs for 1 month through May 22nd, which is actually International Biodiversity Day. So, please, if you can, get out there and take tree height and land cover observations. You can do it the traditional globe way. You can use the online protocols using for tree height handle clinometer, and then basically the pacing with the land cover observations. But you can also use the NASA Globe Observer app and use the trees tool and the land cover tool. And as one of our suggestions is, if you happen to start off with a tree height observation, when you submit that data on the app and you're standing at the base of the tree, go ahead and take a land cover observation. All you have to do is back up in your app, go back to the home screen, and then open up, once you submitted the tree height data, go and open up the land cover tool, and you can do a land cover observation in that same location, because that will really help us with with having these two observations at the same location. But as a reminder, once again, this begins this Friday, April 22nd on Earth Day. And I will send a reminder out, most likely the morning of Earth Day. Peter Falcon and I will actually be in Washington, D.C. for a NASA event at Union Station. We're going to be there. It's an event that runs Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, 12 to 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. At Union Station, we have a huge NASA event there. We will be representing the GLOBE program as well as the NASA ICET-2 mission. So we will have some exhibits and some demos there. So if anybody happens to be in the DC region this weekend, stop by, the usually very busy Union Station, so basically the hub of the metro system and the rail system in Washington, DC. So once again, that's in 3 days. And the last thing I want to show you is that our next webinar will be Tuesday, May 10th, 2022. And this is going to be at a little different time because we have a couple speakers from different places, and we're finalizing those now. One of them is going to be, we're going to return to a group from Croatia that wasn't able to present before, but so we're going to have them present at this one, and most likely it's going to be a video presentation because they are actually going to be at the National Globe competition in Croatia during this time. But they've agreed to send in a presentation with their research, and we'll also be focusing on some other research in the Globe Near East North Africa region. And I've reached out to Salma, and she is in turn reaching out to some teachers there that she recommends would be great for presentations. So stay tuned for this. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jonas, for the amazing presentation and fielding all of the questions. And I know that, you know, when we have webinars where a speaker has lots of questions asked of them, that, you know, everybody was really well and, you know, really well engaged into your presentation. So thank you so much for that, for agreeing to do this presentation. If there's anyone else who wants to finish up with anything, we'll then adjourn, and we will see you next month. And remember, get out and take those tree height and land cover observations.
Thank you.